Nikki has taught me that anti-racism work is sacred, ongoing, life transformative work that takes community, time, and commitment. And we use a version of this statement in our church's anti-racism statement. She is the founder of Transform Nursing and a subject matter expert on diversity and inclusion with over 10 years of experience as a diversity and inclusion coach. Nikki is an expert on promoting individual and organizational growth by navigating difficult conversations around race, class, and other social barriers. She helps people learn to create spaces that heal rather than harm. And I know we are all about being a welcoming, healing space. So I just want you to just know what a value you're getting here in Nikki sharing her expertise and wisdom and lifelong experience as a Black woman with us. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. That's so kind. Thank you all for welcoming me back again. As you know, I love being with you. Just really appreciate the way that you are honoring different peoples. I learn as well. So I just wanted to say that. And it also sounds like you've all been doing some work around decolonization. Is that right? Give me a thumbs up if that's on board or on track. Good deal. So it's just something I'm glad that the journey is there. So I just feel like even more welcome to come in and just continue the journey with you all. So I believe that I am going to be singing a song for you. And the song that I'm singing, it's not a religious song, but it is a thought-provoking song. And I heard the spirituals in the very beginning. They are some classics, and I love those. So thank you for those beautiful songs as well. This song is called Strange Fruit, and it's by Billie Holiday. And there's many of you probably know it. There's a great movie out about her right now. But it's, believe it or not, the song that just came to my mind, and it's the song that I would like to share with you all. So I'll sing, and then we'll go right into the message for this day. Okay. Southern trees bear a strange fruit with blood at the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. All this strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. The gentle scent of the galleon south. The bulging eyes and twisted mouth, the gentle scent of magnolias, both sweet and fresh, and the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is the fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to sigh, for the sound, oh, for the sound to rise, for the trees to dry up. Here is that strange and bitter cry. Thank you. So that song is a reflection of the true and heartfelt reality of how colonialism and colonization have impacted not only Black and Brown people, but all of us across the globe. It's a global concept, and I want us to understand that today. So, what we're going to talk about is the colonization of the motherland of Africa. And I wanted to focus on this because I believe that sometimes we think that colonialism happened in one place and it happened everywhere. But in many ways, it started in Africa. So I want to talk about that. A quote by Martin Luther King Jr. says that the richer we have become materially, the poorer we become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly in the air like birds and swim in the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers. And I would take this a step further to also say that we have not learned the art of living together as humans first, and then as people with individual pursuits and passions. Today, I want to take a critical look at the colonization of Africa as a reflection of global colonialism, where in every part of the world, colonialism has dismantled, divested, disarticulated people who were living their lives in a way that was appropriate for them. There's not a single corner of the world, a single practice or action that has not been upset by or influenced by colonialism. And its most devastating impact has been on Indigenous people. Indigenous peoples of the world who, for millennia prior to, were living, growing, engaged in business, building cities, practicing religion, writing laws, and perhaps, and maybe most importantly, spiritually connected to a source of true and divine inspiration, who are now isolated and torn from their culture by force, torture, and murder. Colonialism is where one country assumes political control over another, often by establishing colonies and generally with the aim of economic dominance. In the process of colonization, colonizers impose their religion, their language, their economics, and other cultural practices on the indigenous peoples. The foreign administrators rule the territory in a pursuit of their interests, seeking to benefit from the colonized religion's people and plunder their resources. The problem with most people, and specifically with white bodied people, is that the lie is sold rather than the truth. And often there's a preference to believe the lie because it is more palatable. I would want to believe it too if it were more palatable. And white Christians have built entire kingdoms off of the lie that Indigenous people are, quote, wrong or bad or poor savages that need to be saved from their wretched lives. And that is their Christianity, that it gives them purpose and meaning, that they, with their materialistic preferences and even the single-minded pursuit of advancement, were the antidote for what? For nothing. There was no antidote needed because there was no illness or wretchedness other than the havoc wreaked by colonizers. And in the words of Nikki Sanchez, an Indigenous scholar and filmmaker, this history is not your fault, but it is absolutely your responsibility. One must take pause and think about who these people were that felt it was necessary to change the world order by establishing an elitist system so against nature that it plummeted every other group into poverty and desperation. These were a people without a moral code, without a true spiritual technology, without a cultural home of love and peace. And in fact, they were behaving savagely. When we step over media and through history and travel around the whispers of our neighbors who look like us and walk into the light, we will see that history has made plain all along for those who can see. Christ said, "Those who have an ear, let them hear." The parables that Christ spoke of weren't for everyone, they were for a select few. And that was by design. Not all have been given access to the mysteries of Christ. It is to those who yearn for righteousness. And my question to you all today is, do you? Do you yearn for righteousness? Let's take a moment and analyze the truths that are not necessarily taught in schools, not shown on television, and certainly not discussed, because to do so would alter the delicate lie that white bodied Christian people came to Africa and other countries as missionaries to help. Let's journey back to a time in history called the Berlin Conference. And the Berlin Conference happened in 1884. Other ways of describing the Berlin Conference is the scramble for Africa. It's also been called the partition of Africa, the conquest of Africa, and even the rape of Africa. And it was the invasion, occupation, division, and colonization of African territories by European powers during a short period known to historians as the New Imperialism between 1881 and 1914. The 10% of Africa that was under formal European control in 1870 increased to almost 90% by 1914, with only Ethiopia, Abyssinia, and Liberia remaining independent. European motives included the desire to control valuable natural resources, rivalry, and the quest for national prestige, and let's not forget religious missionary zeal. Let's ask a question. Why is white supremacy the belief that white-bodied people, the youngest in our evolution, know more and better than any other group? Who gets to determine what civilized even means? Where does this come from, given that white skin has only been around for the last 10,000 years or so? A DNA sample from a 10,000-year-old skeleton discovered in Go Cave near Cheddar Gorge, England, offers a remarkable revelation. The first modern British people had, quote, dark brown to black skin. According to recent analysis, they also had dark curly hair and blue eyes. In other words, whiteness in Europe is a much newer thing than we thought. Bringing things into modern light, we know now that intention is not the sole measure of harm. To say that we didn't intend to harm is not enough, or to say it's not our fault because we didn't know does not absolve from harm inflicted and the injury that occurs. Again, this history is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. To obtain righteousness, you must first acknowledge the sin and the complicit role that has been played, even if that role is ignorance or colorblindness or willful indifference. It must be named so that you can truly be free, so that we can all be free. White-bodied Christian people have played the hero role for centuries in the subjugation of indigenous peoples. We know now that to rectify the wrong, you have to know the history first, then adjust your behaviors and attitudes as a result of what you've learned. And part of the learning is seeking, asking, praying, reflecting, and then ultimately changing. When Christ came to the world, it was a big adjustment for many people because he operated with a different kind of power. It wasn't a power based off of material gains or wealth. That upset the scribes of the time, which were the Sadducees, the Pharisees. Those were the different sects who had established their own doctrine for the people, for how these people could enter the temple, how they could approach God. They changed everything up. And their goals delineated who had privilege and who didn't. In this case, they were those who believed that their evil would not be noticed or go unchecked. But what they were devoid of was a spiritual power. I believe then, as I do now, that Christ was gathering the lost and showing people how to operate in spirit, how to live righteously, as well as in alignment with nature. Another truth that we must acknowledge is that this was deliberate, sustained, and continual oppression of indigenous peoples. The lie that we have all been fed is that colonialism, one, is over and political takeover was necessary. Given the perception of heroism to white-bodied people, it denies the ugliness, the greed, the outright dehumanization that occurred. And it is this denial of humanness that rips the soul apart. Here are just a few examples of the denial of humanity. Conquests of territories were inevitably followed by public displays of the indigenous people for scientific and leisure purposes. Carl Hagenbeck, a German merchant in wild animals and a future entrepreneur of most European zoos, decided in 1874 to exhibit Samoa and Sami people as, quote, purely natural populations. In 1876, he sent one of his collaborators to the newly conquered Egyptian Sudan to bring back some wild beasts and some Nubians. Why not? Presented in Paris, London, and Berlin, these Nubians were successful, and the Nubians were the dominant people group of the time in Egypt. Such, quote, human zoos could be found in Hamburg, Antwerp, Barcelona, London, Milan, New York City, Paris, and the list continues. With 200,000 to 300,000 visitors attending each exhibition. In the article, Analysis of Colonialism and Its Impact in Africa by Stephen Ocheni and Basil Nwankwo, they explain, for nearly 6 centuries now, Western Europe and its diaspora have been disturbing the peace of the world. Enlightened through their renaissance by the learning of the ancient Mediterranean, armed with the gun, the making of whose powder they had learned from Chinese firecrackers, equipping their ships with Latin sails, astrolabes, and nautical compasses, all invented by the Chinese and transmitted to them by Arabs, fortified an aggressive spirit by an arrogant messianic Christianity of both Popish and Protestant varieties. And motivated by the lure of enriching plunder, white hordes have sailed forth from Western European homelands to explore, assault, loot, occupy, rule, and exploit the rest of the world. And even now, the fury of their expansionist assault upon the rest of us has not abated, end quote. The fact that we are here today discussing anti-racism practices and ways to be better lets us know that we still have a long way to go. Finally, let us analyze the impact of colonialism on Africa, which can be extrapolated to other indigenous societies in the world, and of course, to Black and brown-bodied people in this country as well, and understand that these conditions continue to exist centuries later, and like we said, even today. So just a few points. One of the points in the impacts of colonialism is destabilization of culture and economy. What tends to happen and what continues to happen in places like Africa and other places is that people are forced into certain industries, much like women used to be forced into certain industries, into teaching and being secretaries. Being denied access to all industries naturally decreases your ability to grow. So it keeps you from that accelerator factor that we use so much in our capitalistic economy for our monies to grow, for our, where we put our monies in markets. This is the way I think about it. If you have your money in a CD, you know that you're going to gain very little. I don't know the actual interest rate that you get from CDs these days, 1%, something like that, over 2 or 3 years. So compare that, a CD, to putting your money in the stock market and letting it grow. Well, which one's going to grow faster? The stock market, especially over time. So what's happened is in countries like Africa and other places, and even here with our people, Black and brown-bodied people, we're at a place where we're investing in CDs and our money's barely growing, whereas everyone else is investing in these other markets because they've been given access to other markets. And there are many different reasons why those gaps continue to exist. But one of the biggest ones is if you empower people to actually grow, then that's exactly what they'll do. So a lot of places just don't get the same kinds of returns on their investments, including Africa and other, countries. So that destabilizes the economy. Another point is miseducation and underdevelopment. So in Africa, of course, when they came in, there was colonial education. There had to be, right? You had to take what was being taught and then replace it with something. But the education that was being provided clearly was not sufficient for the people that were learning and trying to, continue to grow, because what they were learning was taken away. Their traditional learning was taken away. And it's similar in American education, where it's at best hollow or empty. It can't foster any meaningful development within Indigenous populations because it's really not for those populations. So again, much like today, we see a lot of Black and brown schools, and the kids are struggling, in these systems because it wasn't designed for them. And the systems weren't designed for truth; they weren't designed for real growth. But it really, really, truly underdevelops those who were not included in the equation when the education was being thought of. The other thing is distortion and disarticulation in Indigenous patterns. And that's Indigenous patterns of everything. So that's education, we've talked about it, craftsmanship, technology, business, everything gets destabilized. So colonialism impacts every aspect of human life and every ability in human life. And in Africa, a lot of the technology that they had was rooted in their culture and what they knew, and they had their own type of technology. But we know that education that is not deeply rooted in a people's culture and environment cannot bring about any meaningful technological advancement. Further, in Africa, they weren't trying to advance the people. All of the aspects of colonialism were specifically designed to get materials that were needed for other nations and to get it out of the country. There was no investment, just as we're seeing in other cultures in other parts of the world, little to no investment in the people from which you are taking things from. And the last impact of colonialism is the internalized trauma and the hatred that happens with the people who are the recipients of it. And what that does, I mean, it's obvious. I don't know if I even have to really talk about it, but when you hate yourself, it's really difficult to really be able to be fruitful, to be thoughtful, to be mindful. It's really hard to just get up and do your work daily and come home and try and just start another day all over again. And so when people continue to tell you that you're not attractive, you're not worth anything, but they take things from you at the same time, it's very confusing as well. So there's a lot of emotion that happens, and there's a lot of trauma that has happened in our African continents and across our diaspora. Also, for white body people, if historically you have not done the work to determine the depths of the nature of this inhumaneness, you too will be blind. You will be incapable of discerning the truth. You will be subject to the lie that is told and fed to you repeatedly. Then, believing the lie instead of the truth, you will find ways to justify a superiority that is as false as Columbus's statement that the earth was flat. Fall off the edge of the earth if you want, but if you don't want, then come into the light. In conclusion, there is the urgent need for white bodied people to be engaged in decolonization, the undoing of colonialism. For those who established it, must be a part of tearing it down. Decolonization refers to writing back against the ongoing colonialism and colonial mentalities, all here, right, that permeate all institutions and systems of government. All institutions and systems of government, none is untouched. According to Eric Ritz, he was the editor of Decolonization in Indigeneity Education Society. Indeed, decolonization demands an Indigenous framework and a centering of Indigenous land, sovereignty, and ways of thinking. And that's across the board. That's not just for Native people who identify as Native American. This is for all Indigenous people, which is Natives, Black and brown body people across the world. One quote, I'm not sure if it's actually a quote, but Indigenous people need to engage in indigenization. And that is our work. Indigenization is our work as Black and brown body people, meaning that we as the people and our leaders have to create our own identity, our own culture, reestablish our own technology, economy, education, religion, our craft that will be interwoven into good governance. The work of indigenization may mean linguistic revitalization, ceremony, storytelling, consciousness, and conscious living. Nikki Sanchez discusses as well historical bystander trauma, which we all are touched by, no matter what being or in it or adjacent to it. We are all touched by historical bystander trauma because we've all seen what history has done. We have to do this work without roles and privileges so we can move toward a future that looks like healing and dismantling systems of oppression. Lastly, in Charles Sepulveda's, hope I said that right, writing Our Sacred Waters, theorizing Kuyum as a decolonial possibility, he says, what do these relationships mean when Indigenous knowledges have been besieged by colonialism? Do these relationships dry up during drought and overflow during floods? Or do they persist beyond both famine and deluge, where the power of the earth is unrestricted by time? Begin from where you are. If you are paralyzed by guilt and shame at this ugly history, then break it down into smaller pieces so you can digest it. In my preparation for this message, I shared with a fellow community member that this is hard work because it's like trying to eat a whole cake, even trying to prepare a whole cake. It's a lot to ask you to swallow, for myself too. But my friend reminded me that in every little piece of the cake, there is still the whole. So take bites, digest, and live. Ashe and amen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nikki.
Absolutely.
We do it.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
no, you're fine.
We do have a Nikki Sanchez video available. Share.
If you want to, that's fine.
Yeah, we're 10:30, so I think we have enough time to do that.
Okay. I think it's like 15 minutes. So yeah, it's like a 15-minute video if you have time.
Is that doing okay up there?
Piali, Qualitanetzik, Niatoka, Nicola Angelica Sanchez Hood, Nimaya Pipil, and Kuskatlan. I'm so happy to be with all of you here.
Doug, can you share your screen?
Is that working? Nothing.
Doug, did you want me to try to share it? I don't know if don't know if I could do any better than you, honestly.
What, Vic? Yeah, I've tried a couple times. Sure.
I can try, Doug. Sometimes it's the sound quality. I heard the sound coming great when you were doing it. With me, sometimes when I try to share, it's the sound. So I can pull it up and we can see. Bear with me. Try and find it too.
Doug, try it again. I had it so that only hosts can share, but you're a host. So
I wonder.
I changed one of the settings just now, so try it again and maybe it'll come through.
May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope.